Sanewashing narcissistic behavior is one of the most subtle yet profoundly damaging cultural trends shaping modern relationships, public perception, and personal identity. In an era where perception is curated, narratives are controlled, and language is softened to maintain comfort rather than reveal truth, the ability to clearly identify harmful behavior has become increasingly compromised. What makes this phenomenon particularly dangerous is not merely the existence of narcissistic traits themselves, but the systematic reframing of those traits into something more acceptable, even admirable. At its core, sanewashing is a linguistic and psychological distortion. It does not eliminate toxic behavior, instead, it disguises it. Manipulation becomes strategy. Gaslighting becomes miscommunication. Emotional abuse becomes intensity. Control becomes care. Through this reframing, behaviors that would otherwise raise concern are normalized, integrated into everyday interactions, and, in some cases, even praised. Over time, this normalization shifts societal thresholds, blurring the line between healthy assertiveness and destructive narcissism. This distortion is not accidental. It is reinforced by social, cultural, and economic incentives. In public life, individuals who exhibit narcissistic tendencies often occupy positions of influence. Their confidence is mistaken for competence, their dominance for leadership, and their emotional volatility for passion. Media ecosystems, driven by engagement metrics, reward behaviors that provoke strong reactions. Narcissistic individuals, who thrive on attention and validation, naturally excel in such environments. Their behavior generates clicks, shares, and discussion, creating a feedback loop in which their traits are not only tolerated but amplified. The implications extend far beyond public figures. While it may be easy to observe these patterns in celebrities, politicians, or influencers, their most profound impact occurs in private relationships. Within families, friendships, and romantic partnerships, the same mechanisms of sanewashing operate at a more intimate level. Harmful behaviors are minimized, justified, or reframed in ways that obscure their true nature. A partner who constantly invalidates emotions may be described as logical or pragmatic. Someone who isolates their partner may be seen as protective. A person who alternates between affection and cruelty may be labeled as complicated or misunderstood. This reinterpretation creates cognitive dissonance. When behavior does not align with its description, individuals begin to question their own perception of reality. If others consistently describe the narcissistic individual in positive terms, the person experiencing harm may internalize the belief that they are the problem. They may conclude that they are too sensitive, too reactive, or too demanding. This internalization is not merely a misunderstanding, it is a psychological shift that redirects attention away from the behavior and onto the individual experiencing it. Over time, this process erodes self-trust. The ability to accurately interpret experiences becomes compromised, making individuals more vulnerable to further manipulation. Gaslighting thrives in this environment. By denying events, rewriting history, or minimizing the impact of their actions, narcissistic individuals reinforce the distorted narrative. When this narrative is supported by external voices, friends, family, or cultural norms, the distortion becomes even more entrenched. One of the most insidious aspects of narcissistic dynamics is the gradual escalation of tolerance. Harmful behavior rarely begins in extreme forms. Instead, it emerges incrementally, often disguised as minor issues. Occasional dismissive comments, subtle insults, or moments of anger may initially seem insignificant. However, as these behaviors become more frequent or intense, they are often rationalized or overlooked due to prior normalization. The individual adapts, adjusting their expectations and boundaries in response to the evolving dynamic. This gradual adaptation creates a dangerous illusion of improvement. If the frequency or intensity of harmful behavior decreases temporarily, it may be interpreted as progress. However, a reduction in abuse is not equivalent to the presence of healthy behavior. This distinction is critical yet frequently misunderstood. The absence of overt conflict does not indicate emotional safety, it may simply reflect a temporary shift in the cycle. This cycle is reinforced by intermittent reinforcement, a psychological mechanism that is particularly powerful in maintaining attachment. Moments of kindness, affection, or calm are interspersed with periods of negativity, creating unpredictability. The brain becomes conditioned to seek resolution, focusing on positive moments as evidence of potential change. This dynamic fosters hope, even when the overall pattern remains harmful. The unpredictability itself becomes engaging, as the individual attempts to reconcile conflicting experiences. At the center of narcissistic behavior lies a fundamental lack of accountability. Narcissistic individuals rarely take responsibility for their actions. Instead, they deflect, justify, or project blame onto others. This absence of accountability is often masked by charm, intelligence, or charisma, making it less visible to those who are not directly affected. In public settings, this may appear as confidence or decisiveness. In private relationships, however, it manifests as an inability to resolve conflict constructively. Without accountability, meaningful change is unlikely. This reality is difficult to accept, particularly for individuals who value communication, empathy, and growth. The desire to understand, to help, or to fix the situation can lead to repeated attempts at resolution. However, when one party consistently avoids responsibility, these efforts often result in frustration and emotional exhaustion. Understanding narcissism requires a shift away from labels and toward patterns of behavior. While the term narcissism is widely used, it is often applied inconsistently. What matters more than the label itself is the presence of specific behavioral patterns, chronic invalidation, emotional manipulation, lack of empathy, entitlement, and volatility. These patterns provide a more reliable framework for identifying harmful dynamics. One of the challenges in recognizing narcissistic behavior is its inconsistency. The same individual who is attentive and supportive in one moment may be dismissive and hostile in the next. This variability creates doubt. If the behavior were consistently negative, it would be easier to identify and address. However, the presence of positive traits complicates the assessment. The individual may believe that the negative behavior is temporary or situational, rather than indicative of a deeper pattern. This inconsistency also influences how others perceive the narcissistic individual. Friends, colleagues, and acquaintances may only witness the positive aspects, leading them to dismiss or minimize reports of negative behavior. This lack of external validation can be isolating. The individual experiencing harm may feel misunderstood or unsupported, reinforcing their self-doubt. The role of enablers is significant in perpetuating narcissistic dynamics. Enablers may not exhibit narcissistic traits themselves, but they contribute to the continuation of the behavior by minimizing, justifying, or reframing it. Their motivations vary. Some seek to avoid conflict. Others prioritize maintaining relationships or protecting their own interests. Regardless of intent, their actions reinforce the distorted narrative. Enablers often use language similar to that found in Sanewashing. They describe the narcissistic individual as passionate, strong-willed, or misunderstood. While these descriptions may contain elements of truth, they fail to capture the full scope of the behavior. More importantly, they invalidate the experiences of those affected. This invalidation compounds the psychological impact, making it more difficult for individuals to trust their own perceptions. The effects of prolonged exposure to narcissistic behavior are extensive. Emotional well-being is often compromised, with individuals experiencing chronic stress, anxiety, and depression. Cognitive functioning may also be affected. Difficulty concentrating, making decisions, or maintaining focus is common. Over time, the individual's sense of identity may become fragmented as they adapt their behavior to navigate the dynamic. This adaptation often involves self-abandonment. Individuals may suppress their own needs, preferences, and opinions to avoid conflict or gain approval. They may alter their behavior, avoid certain topics, or disengage from activities that once brought them fulfillment. While these adjustments may reduce immediate tension, they come at the cost of authenticity and self-respect. Breaking free from this dynamic requires clarity. This clarity is not simply intellectual, it is experiential. It involves recognizing patterns, understanding their implications, and accepting that change is unlikely without accountability. This acceptance can be challenging, particularly when it conflicts with hope or emotional attachment. However, it is a necessary step toward informed decision-making. One effective approach to managing narcissistic behavior is strategic disengagement. This does not necessarily mean complete separation, although that may be appropriate in some cases. Rather, it involves reducing emotional investment, setting boundaries, and prioritizing self-preservation. Boundaries may include limiting communication, avoiding certain topics, or establishing clear expectations for interaction. It is important to note that boundaries are not tools for changing the narcissistic individual. They are mechanisms for protecting oneself. Attempting to enforce boundaries with the expectation of altering the other person's behavior often leads to disappointment. Instead, boundaries should be viewed as a means of maintaining personal stability and control. Rebuilding self-trust is a critical component of recovery. After prolonged exposure to manipulation and invalidation, individuals may struggle to trust their own perceptions. Rebuilding this trust involves validating one's experiences, seeking objective perspectives, and prioritizing personal well-being. This process takes time and requires consistent effort, but it is essential for long-term resilience. Education plays a key role in this process. Understanding the mechanisms of narcissistic behavior, such as gaslighting, projection, and intermittent reinforcement, provides a framework for interpreting experiences. This knowledge reduces confusion and enhances the ability to anticipate patterns. It also empowers individuals to respond more effectively, rather than reacting impulsively. An important realization in this context is that not all individuals can be reasoned with. This may seem counterintuitive, particularly for those who value logic and empathy. However, attempting to apply these principles in situations where they are not reciprocated often leads to frustration. Accepting the limitations of the situation allows individuals to redirect their energy toward more constructive pursuits. On a broader level, addressing the normalization of narcissistic behavior requires a cultural shift. This includes adopting more accurate language, increasing awareness, and prioritizing truth over comfort. While such changes may be gradual, they begin with individual recognition. Each person who chooses to identify and name patterns accurately contributes to a more informed and resilient society. Ultimately, the most significant outcome of this awareness is empowerment. Understanding narcissistic behavior does not eliminate its impact, but it provides a framework for navigating it. It transforms confusion into clarity, self-doubt into self-awareness, and helplessness into agency. While external narratives may continue to distort and normalize harmful behavior, internal clarity remains a powerful form of protection. The ability to recognize patterns, even when others do not, is a critical skill. It enables individuals to make decisions based on reality rather than perception. Once this clarity is established, it becomes difficult to ignore. The patterns become recognizable, the dynamics predictable, and the choices more deliberate. In a world where narratives are often shaped to maintain comfort, the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths is a distinct advantage. It requires attention, critical thinking, and a commitment to authenticity. However, the benefits are substantial: greater autonomy, improved well-being, and the ability to navigate complex interpersonal dynamics with precision. Narcissistic behavior is unlikely to disappear. The systems that enable and reward it are deeply embedded in modern society. However, individuals are not powerless within these systems. By cultivating awareness, setting boundaries, and prioritizing self-trust, they can mitigate its impact and reclaim control over their experiences. The key is not to change the narcissistic individual, but to change one's relationship to the behavior. This shift is subtle but transformative. It redirects focus from external validation to internal alignment, from confusion to clarity, and from reaction to intention. In doing so, it creates a foundation for stability, resilience, and long-term well-being. And perhaps most importantly, it restores something that narcissistic dynamics often take away: the ability to trust oneself.